for many reasons, I'm very excited to be here. There seems to be an echo here. Guess I'll learn to live with the echo. So, very excited to be here for several reasons, because what the type of studies that Google did in terms of understanding their customers to look at things from a computer-human interface level, we're going to talk about similar approaches, except at the business level, at the macro level, in terms of what does this mean for an organization, and what does it mean for an organization's profitability. So, value propositions, kind of, some people think it's a buzzword, form of useless corporate speak, something invented by marketing people to sound smart. But actually, a value proposition should be the very foundation for your business, the very basis on which your go-to-market strategy is developed. The trouble is, most organizations can't even define a value proposition consistently, never mind deploy a consistent process for developing one. So you all are either consultants or you're all working with different organizations. How many of you work with organizations that have a consistent process for developing value propositions? Okay, there's 1, 2 out of 50 people, so that's 4%. So what we find is most organizations is not even that high in terms of the number of people who are really looking at value propositions consistently. So we're going to walk through a 7-step framework for creating a value proposition that takes customer knowledge and convert it into a value proposition that resonates. Specifically, what we're going to talk about is the process, the 7-step framework, and then equally important, you're going to develop a framework for talking about a value proposition. So when you're in a meeting and they're talking about what is a value proposition, you have some idea in terms of what it means. And we're also going to take some time interactively to talk about what you do at the person-machine interface level with what I do at the corporate level around developing a value proposition. So our agenda, what do we mean by value? What is the customer's role in determining what value is? Then I'm going to introduce a concept called a benefit experience. We'll discuss ways of learning about your customer. And then we're going to apply that to another concept I'd like to introduce called the value equation, which really used properly will help determine how successful your product will be and how quickly the market will adopt your value proposition and adopt your product. We'll wrap it up with a framework not only about developing your value proposition, but about communicating your value proposition as well. So, value proposition, once again, marketing term, often used by marketing organizations as code for messaging. But this is much broader than messaging. A value proposition should impact every single function that's customer-facing in your organization. It should inform the customers that you choose to work with. Notice I said not sell to, but actually proactively using your value proposition to define who you should be working with and who you should be selling to and who should be your customers. You know, your channel to reach them through sales, your pricing, you have a strong, unique, powerful, impactful value proposition, you'll be able to command higher prices. Who your partners should be, not only on the product development side, but also what do you need to deliver your value proposition in terms of service providers? What new products do you bring to market? How do you enhance those? So, one key point, it's much more than just your communication strategy. However, it depends, no matter which direction or ways you want to reach your customers, whether it's inbound marketing, whether it's standards, marketing techniques, you got to make sure you got this nailed before you go out there and start communicating. So, what is value? You got the dictionary definition of value. It's the quality that renders something desirable, beneficial, or useful. But then you have our definition, which is the benefits received, perceived by the customer. So second question, I asked one question about the value proposition process. Second question is, who determines value? Right? It's 6 o'clock or 7 o'clock, 7:30. All right, a little loud here. It's the customer that determines value. Yet so many companies that I've seen, there's a bunch of guys and gals sitting around a table saying, we got to come up with our value proposition. That's not the way to do it. So it's the customer that determines value. We're going to talk about techniques for working with customers, understanding customers to inform a value proposition that resonates with them, allows you to sell more product, and command higher pricing. So we talked to the customer determines value, but who is the customer? It could be the person who pays for your product or service, actually writes the check. Could be the user of the product or service, and we'll get into some examples of users. Could be the person who recommends it, doesn't use it, doesn't pay for it, but is part of a committee that may recommend your product. Person who delivers it. Could be any of these and more. But when you start thinking about the customer, it's much broader than just the person who's actually using it, which is probably the wrong thing to say in front of this group, but the customers are multiple people, multiple individuals that we need to look at as individuals. One of my clients that I've done a lot of work with is LoJack. LoJack is the leader in stolen vehicle recovery, actually stolen asset recovery. I assume you all have heard of LoJack, Westwood, Mass. They said, we have some very cool technology. We're going to take the same radio frequency technology that we've used very successfully to track autos, and we're going to put it in a bracelet that will go on the wrist of people with autism, Alzheimer's, other cognitive disabilities, where they wander and get lost. Great product, great technology. So one question would be, who is the customer for this very special medical device? Any ideas? What's that? Caretakers, absolutely. Families, caretakers, families. Others? Healthcare. Anybody else? It could be the patient. It could be the person who wanders and gets lost. It could be it's the police, absolutely. Part of what LoJack has done is they provide at no charge to the police the tracking equipment that's used to locate the person with a bracelet on. They also provide training as well. But it's the police, because for them to go out and search for a missing person is quite expensive. Not only from an economic, but you think of the emotional toll as well. So one thing is, if we had more time and we had a breakout, we'd be talking about who are your customers. If you're a service provider, who are your customers? But we would actually list all of the customers. And inevitably, when you get in a group of people talking about a particular product or with a company, you'd be surprised how much of a disagreement there is even within an organization in terms of who the customers are. So I want to introduce a concept called a benefit experience. You'll see Lanning and Phillips down here, and I reference them quite a bit. Michael Lanning, Lynn Phillips in the mid-'80s came up with a whole concept called a value proposition based on work they were doing with HP, Apple, and Southwest Airlines. And so I had the opportunity to work closely with Lynn Phillips, and he trained me in terms of how to develop value propositions. So part of what you've seen here, it has been used at Southwest Airlines, which without question has been the most profitable airline in American aviation history. But if you look at they talk about the benefit experience, and once again, it's the overall experience of doing business with us and what happens in the life of the customer as a result of using our product or service. And how do you measure this? what's the impact to it? So it's what happens and what is the impact. So often I deal with companies and they say, our product is becoming commoditized. We can't do anything about it. Well, I see there's some Needham people here, there's some folks here who are familiar with Harvey's Hardware. Landmark hardware store in Needham Center, been around forever. You know, this is Harvey himself right here, his two sons, Gary and Jeff, they run the place. But Harvey's is a great place to go to, but Harvey's is one thing, high priced. And yet, Harvey's is incredibly busy, incredibly successful, yet every time I go there, I know I'm paying a lot more than I should. And so we look at a nail or look at a fixture for a curtain, the ultimate commodity, yet I'll go to Harvey's Hardware and willingly pay probably 2x, 3x, Harry, what, maybe in 4x, 5x, but yet you do it willingly. So really, when you think about the benefit experience that Harvey's Hardware offers, you know, what is it? It's convenience. You get in and out quickly. You get the right, you go there. I know Gary, I know Jeff, they've known my parents. It's a whole family feeling. So they're selling that in addition to selling a 10-cent nail, which I can buy probably for a penny at Home Depot. Joan.
As I shop there, I can show you that they're relevant. They have stuff that nobody else has. And if you have a shopping list of 10 things, they will have all 10 and you don't have to run anything.
Yeah, so you can add even a couple of things, wide selection. But I want to tell you a quick story. I'm a huge, huge Boston sports fan. And I now have a 16-year-old and a 13-year-old. And I was planning to watch, last fall, I was planning to sit down, it was like 12, 15. I was going to watch the Pats game with my two children. Well, my wife, who's very artistic, very creative, and I know some of you know my wife, so please keep this here, very creative, and she basically said, I've been working all weekend on the curtains. I want to hang them now. It's 12:15. And I said, well, the game starts. She said, well, you don't understand. I want to see the light is perfect. I want to see how the light plays off the curtains. We got to hang them now. So I had a choice. I could go to Home Depot, get the fixture, probably get back by halftime. Or I could go to Harvey's, in and out 5 minutes, probably pay 3 times as much as I should, but I'd be back for the kickoff. So for me, what they were really selling was hanging the curtains, get my wife off my back, and so I could watch the Patriots game. Now, was it worth an additional $1 or $2 per fixture to watch the Pats game with my kids? Absolutely. You know, you talk about Harvey's and you talk about their value proposition. This value proposition, you know, it's very clear what their value proposition is. If you went into Gary or Jeff and you said, you know something, I want to negotiate, I want the lower price, you know what they would say? Go to Home Depot. You're not my customer. So we talked in the beginning about how it informs who your customers are. These guys know exactly who their customers are. And let me also ask you one more question. What hardware store on a per square foot basis is the most profitable hardware store in the US? These guys right here. Once again, value proposition ties into profits. So let's go back to our friends at LoJack here. And I love using non-software, non-technical examples with a technical audience because you don't get hung up in the technology for reasons we'll get into very shortly. You're thinking about hardware stores, you're thinking about bracelets. So what are the benefit experiences provided to the different customers and the beneficiaries of the safety net bracelet?
Peace of mind.
Peace of mind to whom?
The caretaker, usually.
Okay, yep. Anything else here?
Speed of recovery. They did their first recovery. I just heard on your video today. They did their first...
Yeah, they did the MBTA, rescued a boy that was 15 years old who left his school for children with autism, went down into the subway, hopped onto a subway car, and was headed to the South Shore. Because of this technology, they were able to rescue him within a matter of minutes. And so, very, very powerful, but the benefit experience to the MBTA police and the Boston PD and the school, absolutely huge. It costs about $1,500 an hour to search for a missing person.
Beyond all that, it's life and death.
Absolutely. You're talking life and death, and so, yeah, so the value proposition and the benefit experience becomes very clear. Now, we'll talk about this a little bit more, but when I first, I did a lot of work with the chief of police of the MBTA to roll out the program. That's a story for another session. But what we found here was that, these missing people, it is extremely emotional in terms of what you're selling. And also getting the police involved is a vital piece of it. So we looked at the value proposition for the police, and we'll get into that shortly. So we talked about benefit experiences. We talked about how benefit experiences are tied into profitability, yet so many companies fail to talk about their benefit experiences. They love it to talk about product features. They love to talk about the technology. And I really become fascinated in terms of why is that? What's going on here? And there's a fabulous book out there called Made to Stick. I don't know if you've heard of it or read it. I know some marketing types probably are more familiar with it, but it's a great read. It's by two brothers, Chip and Dan Heath. One teaches at Stanford, one teaches at Duke in the business schools. And the book is all about how do some ideas become so memorable and others aren't. And some of these brilliant technical ideas just don't resonate with people, don't go carried away. And they talked about a phenomenon that they called the curse of knowledge. And the very expertise that enables you to develop a breakthrough software product, a breakthrough man-machine interface, is the very expertise that prevents you from talking about this in a way that customers can understand. So you become almost too smart about your technology for your own good. And so that's the curse of knowledge. So I've given this presentation before, and each time I like to try to add something new. So here comes some of the new stuff here. So I've really been thinking a lot about this, and in fact there's some research going on at the MIT Brain Lab in terms of how we process information. And when you're new at something, when you're learning something and you're trying to assimilate some information, you have a lot of thinking that's going on here in the frontal part of your brain, the frontal lobe, also known as cerebral cortex. You're thinking really, really, really hard about something. And the trouble is, there's only so much information that you can process in your cerebral cortex before your brain starts to explode. And so what your brain does is actually wired to try to make things into a habit, to get you onto autopilot as quickly as possible. Now, if I asked anybody here to tell me their cell phone number, you'd probably be able to do it without even thinking. In fact, when you leave a voicemail message for somebody, you say, please call me back, you start to fall asleep, almost it just comes right out. It's the whole autopilot nature of what we're geared to do, because they want to take the tough thinking, make it into a habit, move it into the cerebellum as quickly as possible. And so what this means is that your customers are being bombarded with all this information, all this new stuff. And they're working really, really hard, and their heads may be exploding with all the information. You're here on autopilot. What do I want to talk about? Curse of knowledge, on my expertise. I don't want to bore anybody talking about the benefits to them. I got to really, because everybody kind of knows that. That's just so obvious. I'm on autopilot. I get a situation here where I'm just spewing stuff out there, blinded by the curse of knowledge, and my poor customer who is trying to process all this information is just getting overwhelmed. Does this make sense as you guys are here? So it may work as you're developing a new man-machine interface. It also works at the broader macro level as you're looking at a business. You got this whole curse of knowledge taking place. And really, what this says is that we're really wired, we're predetermined to talk about our technology. So when you hear people do this and you see company after company after company get trapped in this, it's the way we're wired, it's human nature to fall into this trap. So this is a document that changed my life in July. Some of you know my son Ben, handsome kid that he is. Fortunately, he looks like his father, so good for him. But if you look at the date here, this is July 26th. He got his learner's permit, and that meant Dad was teaching him how to drive. And so we started off by going to the local elementary school, and it was safe, non-threatening, and quickly he was becoming bored, and I was becoming bored at driving around in circles around the elementary school. So he said, Dad, let's go on the road. So we found a local road that wasn't highly trafficked, and I said something that all of you will understand and be able to comprehend. Because no matter what your spouse may think of when you're driving, you're all expert drivers. You're expert. You've been doing it now for 10, 15, 20, 30 years or more, and you're expert. How many of you have ever driven someplace like the office and say, gee, how did I get there? You're all on autopilot. That's the cerebellum that's taken over and made this routine task. The point I'm trying to make here is that when I told my son, Ben, make a right turn, to me, we all know what that means. None of you, if I was in the passenger seat, would have any problem at all making a right turn. Well, I watched my son get completely overwhelmed with that simple piece of information as a non-expert. He began wondering, gee, when do I start hitting the brakes? Where do I turn? When do I put on the blinker? I got to look around. How do I see that? Make sure there's nobody around. And so he was the non-expert, and my simple command of make a right turn came very close to getting us wrapped around a telephone pole because he just hadn't. So what I had to do was go out on my own later that night and just say, all right, let me make a right turn. Let me think like a non-expert. Let me think like a beginner. All right, where do I slow down? And I was really having to go back to the time of not being an expert. That's what we got to do with our customers as we're thinking about value propositions. Does this make sense? Does this resonate? Yeah? So just to sum up this section about the benefit experience, benefit experience is not. And anybody want to just quickly read this here? Just tell me, Percy, it's not what we usually think of. I deal with a company that's family-owned, been in business since 1956, and you have great people, high values. It's not about their values. It's not about us. It's not about the awards that you won. Nothing like that. Once again, it's all about what happens in your life as a result of doing business with a company. And what this means to you in terms of financial impact, emotional impact, or what are the consequences to you or to the customer. And remember, we have all sorts of different customer types. So this is where our lives intersect, where I look at things from a business perspective, you look at things from a technology perspective. What we're going to talk about, the foundation for a benefit experience is understanding the customer's world. And once again, we saw Google do this as well, as David pointed out, the power of observational analysis, not just at how they look at machines, but how they look at their business is very powerful. And the whole Zen-like concept of becoming your customer is very apropos when you're thinking about the value that your products and services bring. There's a great article that appeared in Harvard Business Review from Francis Guillard and Frederick Sturtevant about spending a day in the life of your customer. Once again, not looking at man-machine interface or human interface, but looking at, gee, what's going on in the world from a business perspective? And once again, very similar to what Google did, except we're looking at this at a macro level. What would a smart anthropologist see if they were watching a customer's environment? What's not working in their world? Where are they having problems? Where are their frustrations? That's where you start to see the opportunities for your product. And so I've conducted a series of what I call Ask, Listen, Learn dialogues, where you go out there and you ask and talk to customers about what's not working in their world. And it's not about product features, but a series of open-ended questions. Often I'm told, well, we have nobody to interview. Our customers won't talk to us. You're amazed how many people you actually do know. So a real-life example, when I was working with LoJack and the safety net product, you talk to them about how they would talk to the police, for example. And do you know what their theme was? We utilize frequency 216 versus frequency 215. And I can go into what the difference between 216 and 215 was, but once again, they were so trapped into what they were talking about and their technology, they forgot. So we really interviewed 15 customers, really wanted to understand the caregivers and what was going on in their world. And we would hear some amazingly powerful things. Now, there's different market research techniques. We could have done web-based surveys, for example, and have people check boxes. But one thing you don't hear is the emotion. You can't get that from a survey. And we would eventually have a group of people from our company listening in. And what we would hear was from the parents, gee, I don't sleep at night because I'm afraid that he or she my child may be running off. The day he ran away was the worst day of my life. The way we protect him is we put locks and bungee cords on all the doors. Limited flexibility. These people change their life because of a child with autism. They're always afraid they're going to run away. There was one story of a family that would not allow their oldest child, who was 18, to go off to college because they wanted him to be home just in case they had to chase a child with autism and run away. Amazingly powerful stuff, which really served to inform LoJack's product development priorities. They rediverted $4 million in R&D spend based on what they were hearing from their customers. Also refocused the marketing efforts, another multi-million-dollar spend that was refocused. And also, we talked about customers. I also want to make the point that our customer's customer, your customer's customer, is somebody else to look at. Once again, in the interest of time, I don't want to go into this too much. So really what we would then break and say, what's going on inside your customer's head here? What are they thinking? Let's do some analysis. Let's document this. Let's discuss this. And you would be amazed what an impact and how powerful this really can be. So get into the question of what benefit experiences do you provide. So one introduces the concept of a value equation. We talk a lot about benefits, and people equate value proposition with benefits. There's also cost to adopt. And when I ask people to describe what these costs are, people usually say the price. But when you look at the LoJack program, for example, the benefits are clear. We talked about these. But there's also cost involved. Any thoughts about what some of the non-financial costs are of using this program?
Privacy issue for the patient.
Yeah, absolutely. Privacy issue. There's a psychological hurdle you have to get over because in the case of Alzheimer's, gee, my wife is that bad, I have to track her like a dog or like a car, even if it was LoJack. So there's some real psychological hurdles that have to be overcome. Other costs?
I imagine just maintaining the device itself and keeping it on the patient and so on requires a certain amount of
Yeah, will they wear it? Will they keep it on? Absolutely. Any other?
You have to wear something that looks like you dropped your watch in a can of paint?
Yeah, exactly. So the main point here is that there's other costs that are involved that may or may not prelude you from buying the product. This is a great tool to look at to determine what are the hurdles to adoption. How quickly will the market uptake and adopt this technology? And there's others such as must call the police. We had, LoJack, you had to call the police. Well, what if I call 911 and the ambulance comes and the fire truck and the police come? Isn't that kind of embarrassing? So there's things and techniques that we had to do to change this. So what value equation for your products or service? I can give you, if you want afterwards, give me your business card. I can get you a resource guide that explains this. Then you can get into market segmentation. You look at the value equation, benefits minus costs. So for which segment of customers is the value equation the highest? That's what you go after first. And then we get into a discussion, how can you increase the value equation? There's things that LoJack was doing in terms of a free trial. Try it, see if they'll wear it. We'll reduce the risk that way. They were also doing some things with the police around education as well to drive down the costs. So getting towards the end here, I promised you a 7-step framework for creating value propositions. Target customers, who are they? LoJack's case, it was parents of children with autism or Down syndrome who have had multiple wanderings. And oh, by the way, can't afford the $99 and $30 a month charge. When they do what we want them to do. Now, it may or may not be buy the product. I'm working with a company where the value proposition for a particular group is to have them champion them internally. It could be to offer to be a coach internally through the sales process. So you have to be very clear what you want this particular target customer, by job title, by industry, if you will, what you want them to do. What do they get? We talked about the benefit experiences. We try to calculate and estimate the value of those benefit experiences to them. Then, in order to receive the benefits, we talk and list out what those costs are. We can get into a little later, at some other time, competitive analysis. How does your value equation compete for a particular target group compare with the value equation for your competitors or some of the other alternatives that they may have? And then we enable them unlike the competitors. So that's a 7-step framework looked at fairly quickly. And then we look at communicating your value proposition. You can have your benefits. And some organizations are fairly good at the first 3, but then we tend to fall down with the proof. Jim may be able to say, this product can do X, Y, and Z. Yeah, I want that. I have the benefits. But if it's risky to adopt, if it's hard work to adopt it, then I'm going to want to have some proof points. So here is a framework for communicating the value of safety nets. Here, you've looked at what we want them to do. If I purchase safety net service for my son, instead of the locks, etc., these are the benefits. And then we get into the proofs. The sheriff of Norfolk County has endorsed the program. A boy in Quincy, now there was another boy on the MBTA that we talked about was saved. Could be that, gee, there's other parents that use the service. There's also start getting into sales tools and sales messaging. You can use your value proposition to create what I call the magic question, which is the one question to ask a prospect that would generate curiosity. Because when you're selling something complicated, whether it's software, whether it's a LoJack safety net, whether it's a medical device, there's risk involved, and you want to start generating curiosity. With the magic question, you have References such as we've helped Philadelphia, Boston, and Miami. You have a clear benefit statement such as find missing people in 30 minutes or less, which also resonates, and a question. And English majors can come up with something maybe a little different or better, but would you like to learn more? And plus the endorsements from the various organizations here. And this has been 30 minutes on value propositions. Like this to be interacted. Love your feedback on this, whether this resonates in terms of what your world is. But what we would do here in terms of the process to really turn into something that's actionable for a business is complete the value proposition for key stakeholders. Identifying those stakeholders. We talked about market segmentation and target market identification. And something I do a lot of with companies is who is your ideal customer? You have a sales organization. You can send them off and say, go sell it, or you can give them very clear direction in terms of who is the ideal customer, and that's the customer for whom the value proposition will most resonate. And then getting into the whole capability, how do you deliver the value proposition, services, getting the sales tools. So that's what I have in the 30 minutes I was allotted. Feedback, resonates, relevant. Matt.
So I want to ask this question in specific and then also interested in your thoughts on the chat.
I'm sorry. So the specific was with the LoJack system you just talked about, they focused on people with cognitive disabilities.
Yes.
And I was thinking as you're talking about that, that seemed very limited, meaning that I could think of other audiences that would benefit. For example, young children, like say 3 to 6 year olds who could wander off, and people who are active in the outdoors, like kayakers, skiers, hikers, that kind of person. And so my first question is, why did they pick cognitive disabilities? And my second question is, in general, how do you know when you've picked the right target, if you understand what I'm saying? Yeah.
So the question, I guess everybody heard it, but is why did LoJack pick the cognitive disabilities? Simply because police must handle those individuals differently. And there's different search requirements for those with cognitive disabilities than those without. There's absolutely possibility, opportunities to expand the market, but they really wanted to start, it was a new business. Think about this. This is an automotive company that really understood how to sell to the automotive customer. Now you're asking them to sell medical devices. It sounds simple. Hey, it's all about the technology. It's radio frequency technology. But it was incredibly challenging to take a company that was used to selling and set up to sell to automotive dealers and now sell to caregivers. So they really wanted to be focused, but pets is another market. And what we find with technology is that we don't lack the ideas of the market opportunities. We often lack the discipline to go through a process like this and to stay focused. And your second part of your question was?
Well, so how do you know that you picked the right one?
Well, part of it is you have special metrics. Is it sales, uptake? Is it early adopters? And you can start to get a sense of, is this resonating? We did those ask, listen, learn dialogues in the beginning, but it's paramount that you continue to repeat those throughout the process.
So many of us work in companies that deal with. So many of us work in companies that deal with business-to-business sales.
Yes.
In business-to-business sales, the decision maker oftentimes is not the person who uses the product.
Exactly.
So whatever value proposition you give them that oriented towards the user, they don't get it because they are not the people who suffer from the problem you're trying to solve. How do you build value proposition to them?
Well, part of it we talk about what's going on in the world of that particular individual. And so if you look at, let's say I've done some work in the chemical industry. Let's say you're trying to get Intel to use a new type of chemical. Well, it may be safer, it may be cleaner, it may be better for the environment, but you'll have different audiences. You'll have an individual at Intel who may be the director of environmental health and safety. Boy, they're really going to want to use a better, safer chemical, but it may be twice the price. So you have to have a value proposition for the CFO, who also may be part of the approval process. Understanding what's going on in the world of the CFO, for example, is absolutely vital. So this may be more expensive, but how does this reduce overall costs? And it could be that your disposal cost for a chemical could be very expensive. It could be that you have employee health issues. It could be you have liability issues. So it's really looking at how is a CFO measured? How does this particular technology impact the world of the CFO?
Well, actually, I think that the CFO and some of these other ancillary people need everything that you have up there. But the actual user is sometimes, maybe all the time, better off with the functions and features than he is with the benefits. Because when I tell the actual user the functions and features, since he's got a business, that's his business, not my business. I don't know that business.
Right.
He can see the benefits of my functions and features way better than I can. In fact, he's already in his head finding benefits that I don't even know about. So if I tell him the benefits, I'm really downplaying the benefits.
Exactly. And I didn't say tell him the benefits, but you can be looking at what's going on in his world, and often you find out the benefits that are different than what you originally thought by working with a customer. So yeah, you may give them, and this gets into new market entry strategies, but you may give someone something to test. And you may think that, gee, this is less filling. And you may say this is less filling, and yet you may hear back from the customer, yeah, this is less filling, but really is what's really important to me is that it tastes great. And you can say, this tastes great, and that could be part of what you develop your market around. And how do we set this up so it tastes even better if that's really important? So it's really talking to the customer, working with the customer, see what really resonates with them.
Also, you got to be careful. You don't want to say, you know, it has automatic roll down windows, so you don't have to roll down. I mean, you know, it's too obvious. If it's a little, you know, some of these things are pretty obvious.
Yeah.
To the person who's actually the user, and he might feel like you're, you know, just placating him or something.
Well, it really depends. You know, I'm trying to think of an example. If I had a coffee mug here, you know, let's say I'm in the coffee mug business, and I walk in, I see Ralph that has, your fingers are all wrapped in gauze. And I asked him, what's going on? He said, well, I keep burning my fingers on my coffee cup. Well, Ralph, I have a special, you know, mug here that has something called a handle on it. This way you don't have to grab the hot coffee, you can grab the handle. So already I'm talking about I see you have an issue, and I'm addressing your specific issue, and my market would be people like Ralph who keep burning their hands on their coffee because they lack a handle. Does that make sense?
Right, and I guess it's, you know, it seemed reasonable what you said, but of course, as soon as you told me it had a handle, I could figure out that you didn't have to tell me so you could.
Right, well, that's kind of an obvious example, but you can see that as it has a handle, you're not going to get burnt, that's part of the benefit here. And that's where I start looking with people with gauze wrapped around their hands because they're burnt. Other comments? Yeah.
Two questions. One is can it be quantified? Because sometimes you go into either an organization or people looking and they don't really sense whether it's too subjective. That's one question. The second question is, do you have different value propositions? Because you've already described going to the CEO is different than going to the marketing people, which is different than going to the customers. So I realize that most of your value propositions are aimed at the customers, but you have to sell them to the rest of the company. So do you end up having a bunch of them?
Yeah, you should have, and that's where it gets into prioritization of, you know, who are your customers, who are the influential customers, What does the buying process look like for your customer? You got to figure that out. And then you develop value propositions for these particular individuals. So, different ones. So if you say that, boy, the VP of marketing, the head of environmental safety is involved, then let's say you have a chemical that, or a device that prevents chemical spills in a factory. Well, who does that impact? Well, it impacts the workers. It impacts HR because you don't have to deal with the chemical spill. It impacts the VP of marketing because he doesn't have to get on CNN and explain why there was a chemical spill and 3 people were killed. So your value proposition to your VP of marketing may be, you would never have to go on CNN and explain why people got killed in your factory. Can you quantify that? In some cases, yes. In some cases, no. But you can talk to the head of shipping and talk about, you won't have to schlep toxic waste, for example, that leaks. You can start to quantify that. So a lot of this can be quantified, and that's a whole other topic in terms of how you develop sales tools and methods to quantify this. But absolutely, the more you can quantify it, the better off you are. Can't always do that, such as saving the life of a lost child. But I could quantify the value of watching the Patriots game with my kids, and I think I spent probably like $10 or $12 in fixtures that I could have bought for $4 at Home Depot. So at least the value of watching the game with my kids was $8. So you can't start looking at some quantifiable nature of that.
You forgot the search costs and the travel costs.
It-
The inconvenience costs.
Yeah,
Pissing off your wife costs.
yeah, absolutely. And so you can say, all right, my time is worth, $5, $10, $200 an hour, and you can start to really map this out here. We're fortunate to have one of the world's leading experts on software pricing, Jim Geisman, here. So he's another person who could provide a lot of expertise in terms of quantifying the value. Percy.
Just to kind of reiterate some of the comments about value proposition, and I think it's sometimes you have to target it to the specific individual within the organization for whom that message would resonate, and it may be different for different people in the organization. So, for example, I work for a design services company, and we were visiting a customer recently, and we were talking to the engineering manager there, and we're telling, and he wanted to know how we could help him bring his new product concept to production, and how we could help him do that, because we had some expertise that he didn't have. So to him, the value was the expertise we could provide that could complement his internal resources. But then across the table was the procurement guy, for whom that didn't matter. That person's metric by which that person was judged was cost. So it was like, well, can you do it cheaper than we can do it internally? So then the value proposition is, for that person is the cost of doing, outsourcing it to us versus doing it inside. And finally, neither of those two were that critical when the CEO walked in and he's saying, how are things going? And we were talking to him, and he said, you know what? The most important thing to me is time to market. I want to get my product to market before my competitor does. So can you help me get to market faster? So it was, for one, it was the engineering part. For the other guy, it was cost. But for the CEO, it was time to market. And so each of these is a value proposition, but it was different for the different stakeholders within the company. And then actually, when you think about it, that the time to market was the most important one for that company. Anyway.
Great, thanks. Yeah, so like I said, different people, different value propositions, absolutely critical. Any other comments? Then, Joan.
I come from the world of advertising. So in the marketing world, it's either B2B or B2C. And the way I can highlight that, because I worked in automotive in Detroit, and we would meet with the engineers, and they would tell us all the functionality under the hood, right? and they'd say, we have this great new innovation, and they go on and on and on about it. The management would listen to it, and they'd typically ask if it was cost effective. That was their value proposition. And our pushback was, how's the consumer, the end user, the purchaser, the B2C person, how are they going to experience it? Because if they're not going to experience it, it's nothing that we can message. And it's probably nothing that you can do a value add on, because it's just not going to be something that ultimately is going to be experienced by your ultimate end user. So the B2B to B2C is that place where you need to play and understand your product very well.
Yeah.
And the whole world works in one place or the other, and that's the best place to start to understand.
And we can also talk at some other point about how B2C techniques are being used in marketing as well, which is a... Yes?
So back to the LoJack bracelet case study.
Yeah.
How are they actually selling these things? Are they? Is this like advertisements in Parade magazine, cable television? What's the?
You know, it's a great question. They're really looking at how do we, sell that.
Right.
It's right now it's highly focused. Parade magazine is nice, but it's really the folks with children with autism. So really you're looking at a 1 in 100, 1 in 110 situation here. And so it's really through parent special needs groups, schools is another way to do that. But some direct mail, there's other ways to look at this. But once again, identifying who your target market is enables you to focus your marketing efforts. The police has been in the local communities. They know a lot of the children who've gone wandering. So the police is another channel as well. But once again, the more focused your marketing effort is, the lower the cost per customer acquisition. To put an ad in USA Today, Joan, you probably know.
There's a whole discipline called media strategy. So once you've identified your target, what's the best, most efficient way to deliver against that? And you're talking about a penetration of less than 1% of the U.S. population.
Exactly.
Parade magazine has a penetration of about 16%, and you're not going to spend the money for that extra 15%. So
Yeah.
how do you get really close to your target?
Exactly. So it's really looking at, all right, we're looking for, the customers, such as parents of children with autism. Where do they hang out? What societies are they part of? Who has the influence? Yes.
So far, nobody has asked what I would expect would be the key question for this group. What does all this have to do with product design?
Mm-hmm.
Do you advise people on how to design their products to maximize value?
So I'm not a product design guy like you guys are, but what we will do is identify what particular problems do you want the product to solve. I'm going to tell you we'll wrap up here with, I guess, how much more time do we have, but we'll wrap up at least with one quick story. One of the most successful new product introductions I know of is actually being done by a friend of mine. He's an accountant. He is the president of a 30-person accounting firm. And he really, at one point, was very concerned because he thought he hired, social misfits as accountants because they didn't like to spend time at the client site. That's how he makes your money. You go out there, you meet with the clients, and you bill. And so we asked them, well, what's wrong with you people? Why aren't you spending time on the client site? And they said, well, it's an issue of productivity. We have 2 monitors in our offices. We're twice as productive than we go with a client when we only have 1 monitor on our laptop. It's just very hard to work there. So he realized it wasn't a hiring issue or a personality issue or a shyness issue, but it was a productivity issue. And so you talk about the implications for product development. He then said, I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to buy a portable monitor that they can take with them that's light and that they can carry and take to the client site. Couldn't find one. So he got with a team of engineers and recognized that there was a problem that needed to be solved and developed a mobile monitor. This now is a very, very new product. They've hit $1 million in sales after a few months. They've become adopted by all the major accounting firms as a standard, and it's just the tip of the iceberg for this opportunity. So you talk about the way to develop a product and the implications for product development, absolutely. You start by understanding the customer's environment, the customer problem. Now, he had a huge advantage because he was the first customer. He knew what the problem was. He was living it. And so that enabled him to go out there and say, yes, I understand the value proposition. There is a clear need. Versus so often we're there in these brainstorming meetings with product development. Well, we could do this. We could add another wing doodle onto this because that would be fascinating science. And boy, maybe we'll put 2 wing doodles on both sides and have a third thingamajig coming up the middle. And boy, that'd be a fun project to work on. These guys would love to work on. Let's go do the 2 wing doodle, 1 thingamajig widget. And that's what often happens. You know what happens next? They go over to the marketing folks and say, who wants to buy this? And then marketing develops some beautiful collateral, maybe take out some ads, has a wonderful 4-color brochure, gives it to sales. Sales then says, what do I do with this? And they're told to go sell it. They go sell it. They have no idea what's selling. No one buys it. And the VP of sales gets fired because this great product wasn't sold. I see that all the time. So the implications for product development of what we're talking about here, absolutely. Jim.
Product development. The problem is you got to understand the customer, and it isn't just a matter of listening to what they say. It's a matter of understanding and reading between the lines and finding out what's not there. And most developers, the skill set required to be a good developer is a lot different than the skill set that has to do with empathy and intuition, right? And I think we did a project a long time ago with Intel, and the engineers there are very bright, but they weren't designing for the next bench, which was the Hewlett-Packard thing. So we did a bunch of focus groups, and we brought the focus group tapes in, and the engineers who thought they were designing for the customer realized they didn't really understand who the customer was, what they were talking about. And here you see the customers interacting, and you may not understand what they're saying, but you can't argue with what they said. And the problem is that many times marketing doesn't give you the guidance in the detail you need to do the job, and you have to connect the dots.
Absolutely. Most of the time, marketing doesn't talk to us. And your whole presentation, until I asked my question, you, marketing, would not have been talking to me, the developer. Downstream from that.
We can talk at length. Absolutely, marketing. It's a different presentation, in a limited amount of time. But yes, we talk an awful lot about the integration of development, marketing, and sales in order to have a smoothly run organization. So absolutely, George, you picked that up. But once again, in half hour, we wanted to convey some basic concepts about creating a value proposition, focusing on the customer. But absolutely, that information is done together. Those ask, listen, learn dialogues ideally are done with sales, marketing, and development working together throughout that process. So you don't have this over-the-wall syndrome of, gee, this is a great doohickey, marketing, go figure out the markets, and sales, et cetera, that there is some interchange here, absolutely.
I also want to say I've heard presentations very similar to yours in terms of identifying the customer's real behavior, identifying their needs, entirely coming from the development side, coming from people like Jared Spool, who is a theoretical user interface researcher,
Okay.
and never a mention of marketing.
All right, well, that's, introduce me to Jared, I'll set him correct. Yeah, I'll set him straight.
He'll set you straight.
Okay, well, we'll set each other straight. Okay, great. Thank you for your comments, George. Harry.
I think one of the challenges that George is experiencing is so many companies are siloed, right? So they don't really, they're not truly customer-centric. If an organization is truly customer-centric, design, sales, developers, everybody's going to be involved in that process and understanding what they're trying to achieve for those customers. And regarding Neil's comment about doohickeys and thingamajigs, I think a really technical question that doesn't get answered enough in development and in marketing and sales is, so what?
Okay. Is it dessert time? I think it's dessert time.
You gave us food for thought. Do you think it's time?
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah. All right. Great. Thank you.